It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Hello, fellow Quillers. So glad to have you back here at Don't Quill the Messenger. And another wonderful episode where we welcome back one of our special guests, Mr. Hank Whittemore. He has been a guest on the program before. You can find those other episodes at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Be sure to download them and give us a rate and review. Today we have Hank in talking about his monumental book. I use that word on purpose, Hank. You see what I did there? Mm-hmm. Hank's monumental book called The Monument, and it's all about Shakespeare's sonnets. It is a tome. It is quite a hefty piece of literature here, my friend. And we're going to ask Hank about what he believes the sonnets mean, who they talk about, why they were written, and what clues we can find about the Shakespeare authorship question within their contents. Hank, what's the story?
Hi, Steve. What's the story?
Yeah.
Well, the monument is the result of some different phases. I was involved in the Shakespeare authorship question and the Earl of Oxford, studying it from 1987 on. It quickly became clear to me, anyway, I don't know why, perhaps because I am a writer and I also am an actor. And in those cases, we look from the character point of view. And and this is the one work, the sonnets of Shakespeare, 152 of them, numbered consecutively, in the first person I. And as everyone agrees, they're deeply personal. So I found, I said to myself, if all these conjectures, it hasn't gone over. The Oxford theory has not obviously been accepted by the mainstream. The answer has got to be in the Shakespeare sonnets. I started looking. It took 10 years.
Only 10?
Only 10. And every night, and in those days I could stay up until 2 a.m. reading one edition after another and marking it up. Now, seriously, I had 25 to 35 editions and copies of those editions marked up and at various variables to make me understand what was going on. I could not do it. Okay, even with Oxford, even with Queen Elizabeth, even with Shake-Speare, Stratford, didn't matter. So, I had a chance to work for 2 years with a person who was involving me in a great project of science and art. Now, this is going somewhere.
Okay. I'm following you. I'm with you.
I was going into the labs about the new molecular medicine, and I was getting these wonderful color shots. And I eventually collected it into a book published by Thames and Hudson called Your Future Self, that we could see in the inner universe.
Okay.
My favorite...
That sounds like a whole nother podcast series right there.
There you go. Now, my favorite image of all these, now mind you, all were color except one little image, black and white. It was the Watson and Crick sketch of the double helix, the form of and structure of the double helix. And that was published in Nature magazine, Double Helix of DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was published in Nature magazine in 1953.
Wow.
Before all this stuff, right?
Sure.
So I was gazing at this, and I thought to myself, isn't this incredible? 4 letters, ATCG, make up 3 billion base pairs of the genome of a human being, which determines the form and content of each individual. Now, we've since studied genetics and so on. I put that away, finished the book, finished the museum exhibits we did, art and science, and it was November 1998, and I thought, Should I go back to an Oxford conference, or should I give that up and go back to my normal career as a magazine writer, a documentary narration writer, and a book author? I thought, no, I'll go to the conference and I'll try it one more time. And here's my setup on that. And I got into the airplane and I said, look, Hank, my friend, I'm looking at myself practically in the mirror going, are you really going to do this again? I said, well, look, I have to first find the language, something that's comprehensible. Why? Because he keeps saying it's going to live forever. You're going to be immortal because of this. These verses are going to live forever. My sonnets will.
He had a pretty high opinion of his own writing, didn't he?
He sure as hell did.
It definitely matches the type of arrogance that we find in the entire lifetime of the man, right?
No, sir. You and I have a big ego, but combined, we don't have that one.
No, not at all.
Sorry about that. But anyway, he makes this proclamation, right? And I thought, okay, if I find the language, that's one thing. But it better reveal to me something new, something I have never known before, something that I've read in no book about Oxford, about Shakespeare, or poetry, or the sonnets. So I'm on the airplane, and you know that old phrase about you intensely work on something? Well, I happen to have done that for 10 years, and then you take a break, and you walk in the woods, and your subconscious starts to work. That seems to be what happened. And it also seems to be connected to that little ATCG. Why? Because it was a compression of something to create diversity. It's a key to the language.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says, I'm varying to other words. Fair, kind, and true is all my argument. Fair, kind, and true. Fair, kind, and true. Varying to other words. Or in Sonnet 76, he's dressing old words new, spending again what is already spent.
So you're not proposing that the sonnets are like some type of a code, that there's a code.
No, I hate the word code. I'm talking about his way of conveying something. We talk all the time about allegory. We talk all the time about words having double meanings and so on. There's nothing magical about this. There's nothing esoteric about it or special. I can show this to you in a while. But the point is here, I could not find out what that language was telling me until I made some hypotheses. So here are a few.
Okay, let's hear it.
Forget Oxford. Forget Shakespeare. Forget an author.
Okay.
Forget Prince Tudor Oxford as the son, or Southampton as the son of the Queen. Forget any of that.
Okay.
They're numbered consecutively, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
They're in chronological order, at least within the series.
Okay.
Fair Youth was 1 to 126, chronological. They may skip a year or they may not, but chronological, and the other series are chronological. Dark Lady.
Now,
it's a hypothesis.
Are they weekly? Are they monthly? Or none of that matters?
Not now in this setup.
Okay.
Nothing like that. I looked at the language, and there's a simple thing. The darkness. Oh, okay, here we go. Using this language, what is the one sonnet that almost everybody agrees on? Of course, nobody agrees on everything.
No. God, wouldn't that be awesome?
Wouldn't that be awesome? However, I can cite 30 to 40 and more major scholars in the 20th century who are convinced and wrote about it that Sonnet 107 contains a direct reflection of the succession of Elizabeth to James, and then, if they see it, the release of Southampton from prison after he had spent 2.5 years, 2 years and 2 months for treason, and was condemned to die, but was instead languishing in this prison. Now,
okay, here's the thing, because a lot of our listeners are going, 107, can we start with number 1? because they're not as familiar with the sonnets.
Okay, good.
And many listeners, maybe if they are familiar with the sonnets and that there is some kind of discussion or some kind of study, that there's a story involved, they might know that there are supposed 4 characters here, right?
Very good. Stay with me for about a minute, and we'll do this. I thought, well, if he is celebrating at the high point of the climactic thing in this chronological thing, it's let me not my own fears of the prophetic world, dreaming on things cannot control the lease of my true love, supposed as forfeit to a confined doom. No, he's out. Then it's the sonnet about mortal moon, Elizabeth, has her eclipse endured, the death of Elizabeth, and then the crowning and so on, olives of peace. That was James's slogan. And at the bottom of that sonnet, he says, and this is your monument. And it'll last till tombs, tyrants' crests and tombs of brass are spent. Okay, if he's a storyteller, and you and I know this, storytelling, if this is the high point of him getting out of prison, and Elizabeth is already dead, James is already crowned, then about 2 weeks later, April 10th, Southampton walks out of the Tower. April 10th, 1603. Not 1903. 1603, a few months after the Queen has died, and the dynasty is over, except for her funeral. And King James of Scotland has come down and taken over the throne of England as well.
Does Southampton attend the Queen's funeral then? Do we know?
I don't think we know that exactly. The Queen's funeral, he must have.
That'd be interesting to do some research on, because obviously they let him out in time to go to her funeral.
I'm pretty sure he did, but the first thing he did was go see King James. And get the favor, right?
Sure.
She was dead. He was not very happy with her. She kept him in prison, etc. Now, don't you think Shakespeare, in this storytelling, this chronology, if it is, in fact, one single masterwork with a chronology, like a play, don't you think he would tell us when Southampton got into prison? That was the lowest point in the world. Well, if you go back down the sonnets, something began to happen. From 107 down through the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, 50s. Now I'm gasping, 40s, 30s to 27. And there's a lot of remarkable things about this. That's where the blackness ends, and where it begins. If you were reading from 1 to 26, that's where all the story plunges into darkness. And the vision of him in the tower, you can see it, is like a jewel hung in ghastly night. Now, if you're writing a little story about a romance and the rest, you don't say ghastly night. This is Shakespeare. He's not fatuous. He's not hyperbolic. So then I started gasping. I realized that sonnet 1 to 26, which we can get to, 26 is an envoy, a dedicatory epistle. Lord of my love, to whom in vassalage, blah, blah, blah. It's an agreed upon dedicatory epistle or envoy ending the series. Rouse, A.L. Rouse of all people, was one who swore by that. And of course, how symmetrical. 126 is the envoy of these fair use sonnets. So if you take away the first 26, and you realize that, by the way, skipping way ahead, that the Dark Lady series that comes after the Fair Youth is also 26. You have two, look at the blackboard, look at the image, 2 26s floating off, and you have 100. And I gasped. I thought, this 100 begins with Southampton going into the Tower. This is not a story. I've been trying to work in the 50s.
So what you're saying is that there's the first 26 that are
back in the 90s.
They're the first 26, then there's the last 26, and in between that are 100 sonnets. 100.
Now, everything was 100 those days. In Oxford's universe, we had 100 sundry flowers.
Sure.
the compilation. But you had 100 psalms, you had 100 sermons, you had 100 jokes, you name it. That was the and 100. It's a century, if you will.
And 26 plus 26 is 52 weeks
There you
of
go.
a year.
Yeah. Well, that's an odd thing too. Meanwhile, this is where the ground moved under my feet for 5 seconds, and it was probably the one revelation of my life that I'll always look back on. I thought, oh my God, this 100 starts with not leading up to the tragedy, but after the show is over, after the tragedy takes place. He's plunged into darkness, into the tower, and now Oxford is concerned with this young man. Never mind Oxford. Shakespeare is concerned
The
with this
writer.
young
The
man.
writer is concerned with the
writer
life of this young
is
man.
deeply concerned. And there's a million things about it. All the legal language begins to be explained. And then you realize there are 10 chapters. Then you realize there's a center. It's an elegant masterpiece, an architectural wonder. So what I'm saying here is two things. It's a paradigm shift. On the one hand, it's not a story about a three-way love affair with no evidence for it at all in the documentary biography or history. You have a story that is about history. It's a single masterwork about the known history. We know the rebellion was February 8th. We know the trial was held on February 19th.
Okay, so backing up again, most people who have studied the sonnets and they talk about and they've seen information about the fair youth, the dark lady, the rival poet, and then of course the author.
Guess who the rival poet
himself. Well, we'll get to that. Hold on. Let's not get too far ahead. So in many cases, the sonnets are talked about as love poems because there are some of them that are very much about love and about and sometimes very specific types of love. But I don't think that a lot of people who have studied the sonnets have looked at them from this perspective that you're talking about, that it's not a love story at all, but more of a chronicle of the relationships between these people as in context of what was happening to them at the time.
That's right. That's right. And deliberately, I would think, grounding like tracks on of a railroad train. That train is running over grounded tracks. As I say, the events and the dates. It even gets to Queen Elizabeth's death. It gets to the release of Southampton. And then here's a magical thing that I found, just to wrap the 100 up, but it's by no means wrapping it up because what's in there just comes alive, so clear. But that's when you add the author. You don't have to have Prince Tudor, but let's do this first. 107 begins a new series. He's out of the tower. At 106, the end of the 80 sonnets, 80 in a row, about Southampton in prison. 107 begins the next. If you count one sonnet per day there, you get all the way to April 28th from April 10th. And that is the day of Elizabeth's funeral, when the funeral procession, when the dynasty officially ended. And Roy Strong has that nailed. That's when she was like a ghost in the garden, and James did not even dare enter London until after this funeral. And then you have the envoy following it. O thou my lovely boy, who in thy power, etc., etc. And then his last words is, and I paraphrase, you will be. The reckoning will happen for you. And
so
then
it seems to me, in everything that you find when you look at the sonnets or you do any kind of research into the study of the sonnets, it seems to me that there's some debate about who the dark lady could or could not have been. There's some debate about who the rival poet could or could not have been, but I don't ever see any debate about who the fair youth was. It seems to me that everyone agrees on all sides of all aisles that the fair youth was Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton.
Lest I have forgotten, that is one of the hypotheses that you throw in there, because you don't have to be an Oxfordian to, or any authorship. You could be a traditional.
We know the author dedicated his first 2 giant poems to Southampton. We know that there was an affinity between the author and Southampton of some sort. That's unquestionable. And so then when we identify the fair youth as Southampton, it seems to me that it would make perfect sense that if you're going to include this fair youth in this group of poetry, that you have to address his involvement in the failed Essex Rebellion and his imprisonment. And how would you avoid those very giant parts of his life if you do have this affinity for this man?
You could not avoid it. And of course, the Shake-Speare of Stratford cannot be that person writing.
No, how could he be?
Cannot be it. And Oxford, early on, when I read things like, these were popping out. You have to realize this was new. A new paradigm means you're putting on it, just like when somebody discovers the Earl of Oxford as the possible replacement. It's a new paradigm. It's absolutely new glasses. Well, this new pair of glasses that I put on, I read, "When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I'm summoned up remembrance of things past." That's beautiful poetry. But when have you heard a sessions of sweet summer silent thought? Oxford was summoned to the sessions, treason trial. One of the earls, he was the highest ranking peer on the tribunal to put them, to condemn him or not.
Well, a lot of people don't even know that Oxford sat on the trial for Mary Queen of Scots.
And he had done that, yes.
Yes, and hated it and felt guilty about it. The death of an anointed sovereign was something that did not sit well with him.
No, he had to vote for it, though.
He did. He didn't have a choice.
And in this case, too. Now, we're bringing in Oxford because right away it fits.
It has to.
And when he says, "Thy adverse party is thy advocate," even Catherine Duncan Jones, a Stratfordian editor of the sonnets, says this means the one who's against you is really your lawyer. Okay, translate that for Oxford. I have to vote against you. That's what I have to do in this rigged court when everything is preordained and it's one-day trial. I'm working behind the scenes as your counsel. Now, just let me put in parenthesis here because I don't want to forget it. Several years later, actually 2011, so the monument, I spent 6 years writing the monument. Then you have, it was published in 2005. 2011, a traditional Shakespearean scholar, a historian out of Texas A&M or whatever, I don't have, it's off the top of my head. She finds a poem written by Southampton to the Queen begging for mercy. And I've shown that line after line is a borrowing of certain of those sonnets from 27, those early first 20 or 30 sonnets, a borrowing of the themes and words of Oxford's poems. Meaning,
wait a minute, did he write it? Or did Oxford write it for him and send it under his name?
I don't think so. I think Southampton received certain manuscript copies of the sonnets in the Tower. I think that Oxford, at being the highest peer of the realm, had some way to do that with the lieutenant of the Tower, Peyton.
Well, he's sending him poetry. He's not sending him letters. He's not sending him subversive messages.
No, he's sending him love letters, right?
He's sending him love poems, right? But somewhere in those poems is the message that he knows Southampton can receive.
That's right. And all the legal terms of Southampton, the way in which he expresses himself is it's too long to go into here, but you can match them up. And I've done this in a couple of essays.
Okay, we're not going to spend any time on why the man from Stratford cannot be involved here, because that's just obviously clear.
Right.
And since we're going to dismiss the man from Stratford as the author of the sonnets, we have to then talk about who would have, could have, and wanted to have this kind of connection with the Earl of Southampton. So if it's not De Vere, it's somebody who has, like I said before, a great affinity for this young man, a strong and powerful love for this young man. Now, I have seen research that others have done where they've talked about that this was a bisexual or homosexual love affair going on because of the terms of love that are expressed in some of the poetry. I've seen those who have said that that the young man and the dark lady and the author are all rivals for each other's love, and it's some kind of a love triangle that's going on. And that could very well be true. However, what if it's not romantic love at all?
Well,
what
Steve,
if it's filial love?
Steve, first of all, we say, what if that could be true? It's a good guess. I really don't care. They're probably all bisexual. It's fine with me. We're talking about the sonnets, number one, right? And we're talking about speculations about this that have occurred in the Stratfordian camp for hundreds of years. Right. This is carried over to the Oxfordian camp, the same thing. No evidence. Why not have Stratford back? What does Oxford add to this mix? Is he a pedophile, by the way? But it's a sleazy back and forth, a series of events called love. I love you again. I now betray you. I'm wild about this woman, but she betrayed me too. I mean, it's all crazy because it's grounded on nothing. And I would be willing in a podcast to have anybody right here at the mic, and say, now let's have the shoe on the other foot. You prove to me that your bisexual reading of the sonnets can be correct. And I'd love to have that debate. But meanwhile, let's take it off the table and say it's up for grabs. Okay? It's up for grabs.
Okay, it's up for grabs.
Now we're worried. Who wrote these sonnets and what are they about? Now it's in the sonnets.
The question that comes to me is, why does this writer love this man so much that it matters? Okay. That he would write 80 sonnets about his imprisonment, that he would explain that I am not only your judge in this, but I am also your advocate in this. Why does he care so much is, I think, what people are trying to find the answer to. And I think that's why they grasp on different types of relationship ideas that could fit the answer to that.
I understand. And if Oxfordians go along with the bisexual theory, the Stratfordian traditionalists will go along with that. They don't mind that, see. But they do care that one particular thing that sets us off on another path as Oxfordians. Stratford and the Stratford man, Will Shake-Speare, could well have had a sexual relationship with the Earl of Southampton. Not according to his rank, not according to that, but let's say they did. Let's say they snuck around and the great spy master Burleigh never caught them, even though he was promoting and pressuring Southampton to marry his own granddaughter. Doesn't happen. It's like the CIA not knowing that a bomb is being made in Central Park, okay?
Yeah, I think you'd have one dead Stratford man.
You certainly
fast.
Would.
Yes.
You certainly would. But what's the difference then? What's the difference between Oxford? I'll tell you what it is.
Tell me what you think.
He's old enough to be his father. He's a generation apart. That's what's different. That's immediately what's different. And immediately you have an older man, younger man, both of whom were words of Burleigh. And get this, Oxford was pressured to marry Burleigh's daughter, and he married her to not great effect, at a lot of trouble.
Yes, of course.
A generation later, Southampton's being pressured to marry Oxford's granddaughter.
Cecil's granddaughter.
Cecil's granddaughter, Oxford's daughter.
Mm-hmm. Now,
something going on there. But meanwhile, Southampton's joining the court, right? And you have this older Earl of Oxford who's leaving the court. He's actually leaving as soon as Southampton steps foot in the palace. Oxford's gone. He goes and gets married to Elizabeth Trentham. He christens his son by Elizabeth Trentham, Henry.
Mm-hmm.
Henry de Vere, the 18th Earl.
Mm-hmm.
No Henry in the line of the Earls of Oxford all the way back 500 years.
No, there's some Aubreys or something like that, I want to say. Some interesting
and
names.
Edward
and plenty
himself,
of Edwards.
Edward himself happened to be named after a king. So maybe he named him after Henry VIII or whatever, but who knows? But maybe he named him after Henry Risley, the Earl of Southampton. In any case, that was 1592 or three that the christening took place. A few months later came Venus and Adonis, dedicated to Henry Risley, Earl of Southampton. Now, a key fact here is that the writer of those dedications to Southampton said in the second one, "The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. What I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have."
Sounds like a very
yours.
loving parent to me.
Incredible. And that's why the first 17 urging the young man to marry without specifying the name of the girl. Maybe there was no girl. Maybe it was Oxford's daughter, which he certainly wouldn't name if he was trying to not to be, found out. And these sonnets, I believe, were sent to Risley in a packet, 17. When he was 17 years old. Get married. And then he's really saying, pass your bloodline. And then he's saying, pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's due by the grave and thee. In other words, what kind of talk is this between a guy whose patron, the author who's writing to his patron, and then immediately following this comes the dark time,
right?
And that's when, you have sonnet 18 to 26, right? I say those are chronological year by year until Southampton is 26.
Okay, so let's say
they match his age.
So let's say that we go along with this, and we've established that the writer of the sonnets has a parental love for the Earl of Southampton. Doesn't mean he's actually his parent.
No,
it just
commentators.
means the type of love he feels is a parental love or mentorship, even under those circumstances. I mean, I'm certain that it was probably true that Aristotle had a parental love for Alexander the Great, but he wasn't his actual father. We know that.
There you go. Now commentators on all sides have remarked on this parental voice, the voice of a scolding parent.
Yes.
He says, murderous shame. This, who says that?
He's in some ways, he's almost acting like Polonius to Laertes in Hamlet giving all of this advice, this long-winded advice sometimes, by the way, in these sonnets to this young man.
Now let's get a little risque here.
Okay.
From 18 to 26, I say, first of all, it's year by year, ending with sonnet. I said the 17 or to his 17th birthday. Add the other 9, you get to 26. The envoy, Lord of my love, to whom in vassalage thy merit hath my duty strongly knit. To thee I send this.
How old is Southampton when he's thrown into the tower?
When he's what?
How old is he when he's thrown into the tower?
He's turning 27.
And so the 26th sonnet occurs on his 26th year.
Yes, right. And if he started with 17 on his 17th birthday, which we'd have to take a look at that. Then you would go year by year. Now, sonnet 20, I would bet that the only sonnet that is cited for the bisexual relationship, you can tell me another one, I don't know of one, is sonnet 20, when he says, since nature has pricked thee out for women's pleasure. And it's used by Stratfordians to say, see, he was heterosexual. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm just going to say, is that your one word? It means selected. And of course, it reverberates with prick. Okay, that's it. Is this your great love affair, Lord of my love, and the love I dedicate?
But there are other references in the Shakespearean canon in some of the plays. I'm lost on the actual citation right now at this moment, but there are other references where characters say, prick him down.
Oh, yes.
Prick him down for that, which means
Exactly.
write that down. Write this down. So the interpretation could be, since you are written down in the book of life to be for women because you're a male,
Right.
is one interpretation that could be.
Now you can extend it into I'm your slave. Sex slave? How about
I think that's a stretch.
well, you can match up what happened with the monument. When I was doing it line by line over those 6 years, I would go to all the texts. I would go to the Oxford English Dictionary, going way back, see the etymology, do all that. And the striking thing that happened was that all these words were connected to the history plays written by Shakespeare. If you look in the glosses in the monument, in the book, line by line, I was startled. For example, your bright eyes. I saw line after line, look the prince, look the king, with his bright eyes. So you see, that started to happen. But let's go back here a second. It's to Southampton. Yes, it was a parental point of view in 17, and then maybe he then decided I'm in love with him, and now we have this love affair. I'll grant you that's the theory as I have heard it. Okay, I'm talking about a masterwork with an architectural beauty, and I'm saying there's 100, and I'm looking now at the very middle. Remember, Polonius in Hamlet, if truth be hid, I will find it in the center.
Yes.
The center of the 100 is 76 and 77. 76 is all about my verse and about why and how I write. And he gets to the part with one line. Why write I still? I'll read the whole. Why write I still, all one, ever the same? That every word doth almost tell my name,
Right.
showing their birth and where they did proceed. Now, all one, ever the same. All one, one for all for one, was Southampton's motto. You can't avoid it. Ever the same was Elizabeth's motto, exactly in English, semper idem, how she wrote it in letters to Leicester, maybe others, but I can show you those. And of course, we have ever thrown in there.
Like
there for Oxford. It's all over the sonnets. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. In 116, but that's getting ahead.
I am known to sign my communications ever yours and capitalize the V.
Here is a dramatic thing here happening. I talked about the compression of the double helix, the ATCG. Here it is. He's saying, I write about all these three, only these three. We'll talk about the rival poet in a little bit. But only these three people, all one Southampton, ever the same Elizabeth, ever me. And every word he almost tells my name. And then he says, I'm dressing old words new, spinning again. Now, and I mentioned Sonnet 105, where he says, he gives you an example even. If you don't get it, here's the example. Fair, kind, and true is all my argument. Fair, kind, and true, varying to other words. So here it is. The compression. Now let me explain. Let's take Elizabeth. She is beauty. She's called beauty in many a sonnet. Oxford himself called her beauty in his own sonnets, in his own early verse, and she's called beauty directly by Lilly in the book dedicated to Oxford. And she's nature. She was nature in other poetry. She was heaven.
She's nature in A Midsummer Night's Dream when we have her as Titania.
Yeah.
And she's beauty in Antony and Cleopatra when we have her as Cleopatra.
There's 7, 8, 9, 10 words, all circled around, varying to other words for the one thing. So I can vary them and look like diversity and still talk about the same. This is not a code. This is using things that already refer to her. However, in this context, he's done it so masterfully that you can't see it until you put on those glasses. And then Southampton, here's a key to this. It's there's so much involved, but it's all very simple if you look at it. The Queen's point of view, just like any monarch, determined whether you lived or died. The Queen was daylight or the Queen was night. The Queen was beauty, all light and all darkness. Now there are 20, 30 words for the light. The bright eyes, the this and that, the golden days, all this. And then the darkness, the night, the shadows, and the all of that. So he has actually crafted these sonnets so that when they're bright, the Queen's looking well on him, and when they're dark, it's really terrial.
Well, she has the absolute power of life and death in her hand of all of her subjects. And P.S. They're called subjects for a reason.
Absolutely, and here, yes, trespass was an early word for misprision of treason, or treason itself, and they had misprision of trespass. We'll get to the word misprision. It's the one key of Sonnet 87 that unlocks a whole other development. Nonetheless, we're talking about a crime, and the word crime is mentioned a couple of times in this 100. I suffered for your crime. You committed a crime. Your trespass, your fault. All these words were used by Southampton in his poem to Elizabeth. And they're legal words. They're not words about adultery. They're grounded. Suddenly the new glasses says, oh yeah, I get it. He's trying to get Southampton off. Southampton wrote 5 letters to the Privy Council talking about my fault, my crime, my this. That's what's in the sonnets. For your fault, for your trespass, and your crime twice. And
he's telling him, you need to beg for your life. I'm doing all I can out here to help you.
All I can.
And you've got to do something to help yourself.
That's exactly it. And eventually he agreed. You can tell in the sonnets, in the story, he was very reluctant.
He's a strong-willed, hot-headed man.
Hot-headed young kid.
I wonder, just like his father, maybe.
There you go. There you go. Right. Now, imagine that. So you have this, and you follow it along, and you see the language is not a code. It's a compression of 3 people in which the diversity is found. We're assigning certain dark words to Southampton and light words to the to when it's all Elizabeth's view, how she views. So that's a key. It's got to be Elizabeth. Now the whole sonnets are an announcement of this, by the way, and then we'll go back to it. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. First 2 lines, they might as well be a billboard about the succession. We need something going on here so that beauty's rose, the Tudor rose dynasty of beauty, Elizabeth, the queen of beauty. She was Venus and the queen of beauty in Venus and Adonis, will never die. What's in the first line, from fairest creatures we desire increase? What would you say off the top is the key word?
Well, who is the fairest creature? It has to be the monarch. It has to be the queen.
No, it's the creatures are the child. He's telling the young person to have increase or more children.
Or if he is a descendant of the queen, continue that fairest line, right? Why? How could he be fairest if he isn't of royal blood?
He has to be. That's the problem here. We're getting into Prince Tudor before we want to.
Fairest is royal.
Yeah. What's the key word? We.
The royal we.
We is the royal we. The monarch speaks in that voice.
Absolutely.
He had the gall to actually speak in the voice of the monarch in the opening line of his entire, what I call a masterwork, the final magnum opus, if you will.
Okay, well, I'm not afraid to get into Prince Tudor at this point into
Well, one more
the
thing.
episode.
Yeah. Can I just throw in one more thing?
Yes.
Given that context, in the Tower, there's no rival poet writing poetry to a condemned traitor.
No.
Can't be. So who the hell is this 77 to 86?
It's the
sequence?
pseudonym.
Yes.
The pseudonym is the rival.
Shakespeare is the one who can publicly praise Southampton, which he does in the dedications and in the plays.
It's my
the
alter
plays.
ego who I have to call upon now to do this work for me.
I am sacrificing myself to this guy.
I can't. I'm not allowed to. I can't praise you. I can't step up for
Can't
you.
do it.
I have to use this alter ego, this persona,
That's
to help
right.
you how I can.
Guess who identified this in the rival poet series of 10 sonnets? Thomas Looney, the founder of the Oxford movement, who didn't like Prince Tudor because he didn't know about it. You can't. The reason we're having this talk in this way, and I thank you, Steve, for letting me speak it this way so that we don't start with Prince Tudor.
Sure.
Because that's a block. It's a block just like some people like John Shahan and our group think the Oxford blocks, the authorship, the denial of the authorship. And in a way that may be true. Prince Tudor blocks it. But the only person, so the Rival Poet series, and sonnet 82, soon after, in the early part of that series, he talks about the dedicated words which every all writers use, blessing every book, my books, blessing, dedicating my books. And Looney, you look in his Shakespeare Identified, says that's obviously referring to the dedications to Southampton. Now, that's the Rival Poet in that series. It's another confirmation. There's hundreds of them once you open the door. But let's get back to your question.
Yeah. So what I think is true, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode, is because I believe that a lot of people who are new to this topic, new to the authorship question, new to the Oxfordian premise, I think a lot of them have been exposed to cursory levels of exposure to this, including Roland Emmerich's very famous film, Anonymous, which kind of cracked the door open in weird ways, but then also sent it crashing in as well. I mean, he did us some favors, and then he also didn't do us very many favors. It was kind of one of those net total zero, I think. But nonetheless, there are a number of people out there who have seen the movie. They've seen what he proposed in the movie, which offers the Prince Tudor theory, and then what is also known to some people as Prince Tudor 2. Right, in slang terms, we call it the PT and the PT2.
I know,
it has nothing to
crazy.
do with the car.
It gets crazy.
It can get crazy, and I think that one of the keys we need to touch on here is to explain it in such a way so that it's not as crazy as it sounds, and that it can be separated.
Let me do a short history for you of Prince Tudor.
Yes.
Thomas Looney identifies Shakespeare in 1920. By 1930, not only Percy Allen, N.B.M. Ward, but some others are realizing that the sonnets are paternal and that they're to a prince. They're looking at all the royal words in the sonnets. There are many of them. Catherine Chilton has it in her wonderful book, Shakespeare Suppressed. You can go through and just see, these are royal words. What's going on? It must be a royal kid. So they say, well, the hypothesis has always been Southampton. Let's find out. Let's go back and see when Southampton was born.
Yeah, let's chase his lineage. What do we know about him?
Well, what we know about him is that there's no birth certificate, but there was a letter saying a goodly boy was born to my wife by a guy who just got out of the Tower 5 months earlier, had no visitations. I'm not saying this was Southampton now. Not. This was a child born of adultery by the... In any case, it's at the same time for 3 or 4 years, Oxford's having an affair, a known affair with the Queen Elizabeth
Okay, so my first question on all of this would be,
in the 70s, early 70s.
he's identified as the second Earl of Southampton.
That's correct.
So what do we know about the first Earl of Southampton, who apparently should have actually been his father, right?
No. The second Earl of Southampton, the second Earl of Southampton was a legit son of the first Earl, okay? This is a new creation of created by Henry VIII.
Right, so we can follow this down, and now we have the third Earl of Southampton.
Okay, but he doesn't come into it yet. He will be, yes. Yes, my son was born. He doesn't say my heir. He just says a goodly boy was born. Now skip to the fact that Oxford and the Queen are having their separately their affair. They're known to be intimate. Nobody knows. They're not in the bedroom. Okay, so nobody knows. But all of a sudden, in 1574, there's a whole raft of things that happen. Elizabeth goes into hiding pretty much. There's 9 months in which she hardly is seen in public. She may wear those big dresses, but it's a whole thing. And no matter what Diana Price has written in her attempted rebuttal, it's by a non-Oxfordian to begin with, and it's by things that I can refute and that often have been refuted but not looked at by us very much. It doesn't matter. They were having this affair. All of a sudden, Oxford bolts to the continent. For 3 or 4 weeks, he goes to Brussels, where the Catholic earls are. Everybody's worried. Burleigh's frantic. Walsingham's frantic. The Queen goes on progress, winds up in Bristol, and going down to Bath. That'll be the Bath sonnets at the very end, the two at the end.
Bath would be a good place to have a baby.
No, she didn't have the baby there. She has it before she goes on progress. Now, children are put out to wet nursing then 12 months to 18 months. These two children must have been switched. And there was a tradition that the Earl of Southampton, the third Earl, who now is, the mother is the Countess of Southampton and the second Earl, that this is him, and he was the second son. That was a tradition that came up all through into the early 20th century until they stopped doing it.
Okay, but wait a minute. Just to be clear, if you're correct and the Queen has this secret baby, and that secret baby is Henry Roseley, the Earl of Southampton.
Yeah. He didn't become the Earl until he was transferred into this family.
That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So in order for all this to happen, the Queen has a baby. Someone takes that baby and brings it to this family and says, "You are now going to raise this baby as your baby."
Well, not only a question, it's a command from a monarch who, first of all, had it in for this Catholic Earl, the second Earl, who went to prison for 18 months in the Tower and kept complaining of his close confinement. He begged, so did the wife, begged for visitation, couldn't do it, was not allowed, and finally got out 5 months before the birth. And Montague, his father-in-law, the father of, Mary Brown, the Countess of Southampton, and it's on the record, he gets special pass, watched over, to meet in close confinement with the second Earl. And he said, "Now you're going to get out. Behave yourself. Follow orders." He's now the Queen and Burleigh, the Protestant monarch, and Burleigh, the architect of the Protestant Revolution or Renaissance or whatever it is, have got this family under the thumb. And they've got Montague under the thumb, became a trusted Catholic forever until he died in 1590 or 91. Now, not only did he have to accept it, there's proof, I have it, that there was no visitation by the Countess. So it was either a 5 months pregnancy or adultery, right?
Right. So either way, Mary Brown is either a miracle worker or she is going to be doomed because it's proof that she cheated on her husband.
Now, are we so worried? Is she so loving or so glad to have her husband back? In a few years, she'll be carrying on with a man named Dunsame down in the same area where they live in Titchfield and all. And the Earl, the second Earl, is so distraught, he's going to accuse her. He accuses her of adultery. Now, I don't think she went and committed the adultery for the first time when he's out. It had to be during this 18-month period when he was in the Tower, the husband. That's when you have an affair if you're in that kind of category. The Crown, and by the way, as I mentioned before, it was Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father, who created the second creation of the Earls of Southampton. There are only 3, up to this point.
Right. I point that out to people quite often when they talk to me about this, and I say, let's do a comparison here. You have the 17th Earl of Oxford.
Yeah, and the third.
Which dates all the way back to basically William the Conqueror.
Yeah.
And you have the 3rd Earl of Southampton, which dates back, two guys ago.
Right. So what we're talking about is the birth of this boy out of adultery, who could have been taken to the father nearby. You see, it could have been happened and then at some point they could, but it was always.
And so they substitute the Queen's son into this family.
Put into this family, and
your hypothesis is that it's not only the Queen's son, he's the son of the Queen and Edward de Vere.
That is what the sonnets tell you if you look at the language, and it's what this history would tell you if you look at the contour of it. And I wanted to add, she must have hated that second Earl of Southampton, who only lived for another 8 years and was put into the Tower in 1581 at a crucial time when Oxford was begging in probably the first sketch of Midsummer Night's Dream, I beg a little changeling boy to be my henchman. Where do you get that? That's a changeling. So that's what we're talking about.
Right.
And at that time, they drove the second Earl of Southampton to his death at age 36.
Oberon says directly to Titania, it's one of the most poetic lines that he speaks, and Oberon's lines are all in verse and they're all flowery and poetic. It's one of the most non-poetic lines that he speaks. He turns to her and he says, "Give me that boy.
There you go.
And I will go with thee." Okay,
so what happened? Southampton is quickly moved into the Burleigh household, the Cecil household, as the 8th and final, high-ranking royal ward, under the same kind of instructions Oxford got a generation earlier.
Right.
And now there's some room for Oxford perhaps to communicate with this child, this boy, this young man, who is 8 years old, by the way.
And living with his in-laws.
Pardon?
And he's now living with his in-laws. This boy is now living with Oxford's in-laws.
Edward's not in the same roof anymore.
No,
he's gone.
No, but Henry is now living with Lord Burleigh.
The same thing.
With Edward's father-in-law.
And meanwhile, Edward is doing these plays for the Queen through Lily, Endymion, all these other kinds of plays, great plays that precede Shakespeare, that he obviously had a great role in, Oxford did. And do we think that the young boy played any roles in those plays? It may be. It may be that may have been Oxford's chance, not only to be communicating with Southampton in some way, instructing him, or also performing in front of the Queen at court. Blackfriars was used as rehearsal for the court, and there were often new epilogues made that they could address to the Queen after the play.
So here's my next question then. Did the Queen at any time, do you think, if let's say all this is true, why doesn't she accept the child? Because I read about another incident that's very curious that connects to all of this, is Parliament has a meeting and they changed the words of the law when it comes to succession And I don't know exactly if that falls right at this same time or not.
It was.
But Parliament changes the words of the
Early
law.
early 70s.
They say, because it originally says lawful issue from Her Majesty's body, I think is what it was.
Exactly.
What it originally says. And they change it. They change one word. They change lawful to natural.
Exactly.
Meaning that these high-ranking officials are aware of the fact that there's at least a risk that the queen is going to get pregnant and have a baby because they know how much she's sleeping with her courtiers.
Yes, yes. Now, things happened. Oxford thought that she could recognize him, marry Oxford, and they would have an heir.
That would be like him to think that, to foolishly think that.
And the suggestions in the plays, they had some sort of betrothal. That's speculation. Whatever the case, she had a lot of things to do between, let's say, the 70s then and the 1590s. She had a French match to worry about. She had to get France out of the way of converging and joining forces with Spain.
What is the year of Southampton's birth?
74, I believe, May or June.
What is the year of Oxford's affair with Anne Vavassor?
78 to about, at that point, you see it come back from Italy.
So that makes the little boy, say, 5 years, 6 years old.
That's right.
About the time that then Edward has another illegitimate
child. See, what had happened here in Sonnet 33 says all, even so one early morn, my sun did shine with all triumphant splendor on my brow, but out alack he was but 1 hour mine. The region cloud, Elizabeth's dark cloud, Regina, dark cloud of shadow.
They had to snatch the baby away.
As master.
He got 1 hour with his son.
So,
and then they took the baby away.
She's a fickle.
That's what that sounds like to me.
There you go. And a fickle queen. And somebody who had to negotiate with France until 1579. And he didn't leave England until, I think, February of 1582. Alençon of France. It was a big deal. A lot of the plays are about this. Oxford publicly was for it because he was against Philip Sidney and so forth. But meanwhile, in the plays, he's dead set against it.
Yes,
and
that's very obvious in the character of Bottom.
And hope after hope. So then you get through the war and through the 80s of the build up to the Armada. 88, the Armada is blown back by the wind and all the rest, and all the young bandits I mentioned to come down there to. I have mentioned this in other conversations with you, to come down and fight for England, right? In the early 90s now, Burleigh is pressuring Oxford's daughter to marry his granddaughter. To Southampton to marry his granddaughter.
Okay, but under your theory, that's incestuous, right? If you're correct, and Southampton is the son of Edward and Elizabeth, then for William Cecil to be pushing that marriage, he's pushing Southampton to marry his half-sister.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that an explanation, perhaps, as to why Southampton is so against the marriage?
Could be. He didn't do it.
He didn't do it, and he paid a hefty fine to get out of it, too.
And it's very, very interesting that there was a poem dedicated to him. I don't have the name of it off the top of my head. It begins with a C, and it's all about a young guy being forced to marry his sister, his half-sister. But that's just neither here nor there. It's an interesting fact.
You could see, if you're Burleigh, how you would want to consolidate the bloodline.
You could see this
through that union.
My theory on it is that with Burleigh's support, if his daughter would become queen, marry the prince, marry Southampton.
His granddaughter
would marry the queen, marry Southampton, and Elizabeth named Southampton as King Henry IX, then his daughter, Burleigh's granddaughter, would be queen. The Cecils would be royal forever, which was a goal of theirs.
Yes, absolutely.
So what happens? Southampton rejects that proposal. I think Oxford is furious. I think the Queen is furious. And it doesn't go through. and it collapses, and Burleigh goes right to the next guy who should have been in line by history for the throne. Derby, William Stanley, the Earl of Derby, was actually in line for the throne by the the charts. Nobody knew Southampton. He was unacknowledged and illegitimate. But Burleigh and the Queen could have made him legitimate. Anything can happen in a dictatorship, a totalitarian state, or an absolute monarchy.
I think that's something a lot of people don't want to grasp their heads around or can't quite understand about this world that we're talking about how absolute the power truly is.
Oh, incredible.
And how you could lose your hand, you could lose your head, you could lose your life at a clip of an eye, at the blink of an eye and the snap of a finger. You were done. You were gone.
So in Sonnet 87, Oxford breathes a sigh of relief and says, "So thy great gift upon misprision growing comes home again on better judgment making." Judgment meaning you were condemned to death. And the only way out of that is to have a lesser, reduced to a lesser crime. Only the monarch can do that. There's no documentation of it. Here we have in the sonnets, misprision of treason. In future centuries, it became known as a mistake, but it really meant that. For example, you are in the Tower. I've charged you with a heinous felony or crime, but I want you to talk. It's just like a plea bargain we have today. I say to you, look, I'll let you out, but I'll reduce the charge to misprision of felony or treason. And you tell me everything I need to know, and I'll let you give you only 2 years.
To kind of explain that to like how semantical that is, treason, to be guilty of treason or to have acted treasonously is one thing. To have knowledge of treason but not to have acted in it is another thing. And misprision of treason is to have knowledge of treason, but not to have participated in the treason, or to have participated, but without knowing that it was going to become a treasonous act. And
Very
that's
true.
the difference that they make ultimately and let him out.
Absolutely. Now, for example, a few years later, Raleigh went on trial. They found him guilty. The same judge, the same Edward Coke, who was the the head of the trial.
Sir Walter Raleigh.
Walter Raleigh
Guilty of
was found guilty of treason. And Coke slapped his forehead. You can read about this in the history book. He says, "Oh, no, I meant to only charge him with misprision of treason." And that meant that he could not. There was you see, if you had misprision, you were pardoned. You couldn't be put back in the Tower and executed. Well, years later, it came back, and Raleigh was executed.
Yes.
So this was the importance of that. And in this sequence of sonnets, where you have all these legal words, summoned to accessions, all this stuff. I mean, there's 50 or 70 legal words, precise, about all this. Even metaphors about trials. But to have misprision come out there in this crucial
And of
time.
course, we know Edward de Vere was a lawyer. We know that he studied at Gray's Inn and received his law degree from there.
Right.
And we're, obviously there we have an episode of this series about Shakespeare and the law and how much legal knowledge there is in the plays. And of course, when we think about that, we don't think about the sonnets in that capacity. But what you're saying is we need to stop looking at the sonnets as just a bunch of love poems and look at them more as perhaps letters that were written to the parties involved, encouraging them to behave in one way or another and recording deeds and actions in another way.
That's right. Now, you can go all the way back from the progress of our own podcast here and take away Prince Tudor, take away Oxford. Everybody just look at the sonnets and see them as chronological, numbered consecutively, chronological, a single masterwork. and take and Southampton, throw that in as the hypothesis. We're still not into authorship yet. And then take 107 and put the hypothesis that if he's out of the tower at the high point, where does he go in? You could see all this without having these debates that we're having that cloud everybody's mind and can't see what I'm trying to suggest is a major paradigm shift in which it's not about events that happen in secret, that for which there's no documentary evidence, but in fact, important political events that happen in the history of contemporary England.
Do you think it was ever in Elizabeth's plan to accept him? If this is her son, did you think it was ever in her plan to accept him? And because of the way he turned out, she changed her mind?
No, I think that she was going to accept Burleigh's proposal, perhaps. She probably didn't tell him directly, but if Burleigh supported her, she could do anything. Burleigh was the power behind the throne in that sense. The fact that Southampton dissed the relationship, you have, for example, in Ackrey, the 3 biographies of Southampton. In Ackrey's biography of 1968, he says, well, the year 1595, curiously 1 year after the older daughter of Cecil is married to Derby, and Southampton's on his own. Southampton is the leading figure in court, about to eclipse Essex. By the time Ackrey gets to September or October 1595, Elizabeth is telling Southampton, get away from me. I don't want you to mount me on my horse, and I don't want to see you. And in my judgment, from what I can tell of the history, Elizabeth did not see Southampton for the rest of his life. For the rest of his life until she died, for the rest of her life. She died in 1603. That's from 1595, when she said, get away from me, all the way to her death. There's not an instance where he was in the presence of the Queen.
And that would make sense if she was still angry at him for balking at the plans that they had for him, and especially if he really is Edward's son and is behaving exactly like his father, and that would only make her even more angry at him and definitely not want to see him again.
Exactly, which brings me to why now we can see his fury at the Dark Lady. His absolute fury at this treacherous, deceitful, powerful woman.
I have never, in reading the sonnets, even before any of this, I never thought that the Dark Lady, the descriptions of her implied that she actually is dark, that she had like dark skin or dark hair, or that she was...
Well, I mentioned the language.
I think it's all very metaphorical for what kind of darkness she cast upon these other two men.
Exactly. That's why she's called the Dark Lady. It's not because of her dark coloring or her hair. It's about her point of view. And if she's the queen, that point of view means everything.
And she certainly eclipsed their hopes.
Yes.
And dreams and everything.
So he brackets this 100th century of Southampton's prison time leading to the end of the dynasty and the reign, which is quite a story. Untold, if you will, from behind the scenes. The first 1 to 26 call it the Fair Youth Sonnets. Those are not 1 to 26, but just those first 26. The second 26 on the other side is the Dark Lady Sonnets. Fair Youth, Dark Lady. In the middle, a whole different ball game. The century.
In the big glaring thing that we haven't touched on that I think is important to touch on before we wrap things up in a bit here, but I think one of the crucial points to this is Southampton and Essex do what they do side by side, linked arm and arm.
Yeah.
Essex loses his head, and he loses his head real fast. It doesn't take long for her to go, you're done, and you're done.
5 days, 6 days.
And boom, he's gone.
Yeah.
Southampton, she vacillates on the execution order,
Yes.
then decides that she's not going to execute him, but decides she's going to keep him in prison.
Yeah.
Then decides that he can get out, but not until after she's dead. And it's James who then comes in and goes, okay, she's dead. I'm king. You can get out because you're no longer a threat to her and you're no longer a threat to me.
Now, he sent those orders. That was the first thing James did. Sent the orders for Southampton's release. They came by horseback.
His cousin, by the way, if you're correct.
Okay.
Right? He would be
exactly.
a blood cousin to James.
Yes. So,
if he is Elizabeth's son.
James doesn't leave Edinburgh right away. He just sends the message. Southampton is now, that's why the euphoria. He was supposed as forfeit to a confined doom. A doom is a sentence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. After he was sentenced to death with no explanation, he was spared. No explanation that he was released. Well, James said, oh, no, we like him a lot, etc. But actually, no reason why he didn't be executed with Essex.
Why did she spare him?
Well, there you go, huh?
If you're correct, she spared him because a mother's heart is a mother's heart, and she just couldn't bring herself to order his death.
Couldn't do it.
Or let's not even give her that much credit. Maybe she wants the natural touch, as Lady Macduff would say, which she says about her husband in the play Macbeth.
Maybe so.
Maybe she wants the natural touch and we don't give her that much credit. Maybe it's because she can't bring herself to squelch the bloodline, the royal blood in him.
Well, there you go.
Having, I believe, felt regret all of her life about the death of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots.
Now, you know that when she had to give the order for Mary, Queen of Scots' execution, she did not want to take credit for that. She blamed William Davison. And can you imagine, this was an act of total... I don't know what to call it.
Plausible deniability.
Yeah. And said, and it put him in jail, put him in the tower.
Yeah, that poor guy.
And only she could issue that order. And she did it under great pressure from Lord Burleigh. So that was her reluctance, as they say in all her biographies, reluctance to murder another monarch. Because she didn't want to be murdered.
Right.
So here, maybe that's connected to Southampton. We could see. But,
she had to preserve royal blood in order to maintain the premise that her own royal blood was of higher value than anyone else.
Yes.
Right? You had to, if you're going to take the line that we are ordained by God to be here, then you can't vacillate on that edict, because once you break it,
that's it.
You've cracked open the door forever.
And sure enough, it eventually did. When Parliament became strong, James, the whole thing got wrecked. under the Stuarts. Now I might say the end of the sequence. Before the envoy, "O thou my lovely boy," Sonnet 125 coordinates with April 28th, the day of her funeral procession. Right now, it's Booth, the great sort of guy who doesn't know what's going on, but he glosses everything that he can in the Stephen Booth edition of the sonnets. I used it. I wore out a few editions in the first place. He swears that this is a funeral procession. Now, imagine this masterwork is about the end of this very same Tudor dynasty, that he starts it with, that beauty's rose shall never die. It, at the very end, is when it dies. And Roy Strong said, not until she's safely inserted in the grave, in this case, in her temporary burial at Westminster Abbey, with a funeral procession, then James could come in and she was officially dead. Otherwise, she was a ghost for about 20 days, 19 days. So, look at the contours of this story. I mean, it starts with a billboard. This is about the Tudor dynasty, so that beauty's rose might never die.
James does a couple of interesting things. He lets Southampton out of prison. He then gives him an island to go rule all on his own, to keep him away.
Oh, yeah.
But yet to give him something to rule over, as well as a very cushy life there.
The Isle of Wight, he becomes like a little kingdom for him.
Yes, a little king of a little kingdom.
Yeah.
And then another thing he does that's really interesting that ties into all of this is he continues Oxford's £1,000 annuity that Elizabeth put into place. He keeps that going.
Boy, you know.
And there's not any clear good reason for him to do that.
No.
Unless this is all connected in some way. And then some other things that James does later on, and I think we're going to have to do an episode just on James himself and how he ties into all of this. Because upon Oxford's death, he orders a festival of plays. Guess who the plays are by? Oh, yeah, Shakespeare.
That's
and
right.
And then when Oxford's widow dies, he does it again.
Yes.
He orders a festival of Shakespearean plays to be performed in honor of her death. Why would he do that?
It's incredible. Southampton still, had his ideas, and James was afraid of Southampton.
I think you have to be in that day and age. I think I've recently been involved with the production of Henry IV, and I think that there are a lot of aspects of this come out in Henry IV. I think you could look at Prince Hal and see him as a metaphor for Edward. You could see him as a metaphor for Southampton.
Yes.
You can see Henry as both Queen Elizabeth and as Edward as well. Henry expresses plenty of guilt about Richard's death in the Henry IV plays, and talks about the folly of youth and all of those things. And I think you see a lot of that coming into play as well. But when you're working on these plays and you understand these things and you understand this concept of monarchy, this concept of succession, Henry's whole purpose, once he has that crown, is to keep it long enough to give it to his son. That's all he cares about.
And you could see the devastation in those dark sonnets.
Yes.
In the middle.
Yes. And
that's why he's in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes. And he all alone beweeps my outcast state. His whole world has crashed. And those who knew who he was, and it seems like many did, not only that he was Shakespeare, but they got the idea that he was the father of this prince. Nash seemed to know it. And by the way, this is news here. It'll be in our newsletter in the fall. Robert Prechter uncovered a little couple of lines from, I think his name is William Warner, Albion's, but it's a long history books. 1606 it came out, and 2 lines saying the queen died with an heir that she couldn't acknowledge. History book. 3 years after her death.
It's not that crazy. She was sleeping. We know it's irrefutable that she was having an affair with Leicester.
Yeah.
That's impossible to deny.
Yeah.
It's definitely likely she was having an affair with Oxford. There's documented proof about how she preferred him as a dance partner. And I think that dance is a little more of a euphemism than we want to admit. And when you have Parliament going, oh my God, she's sleeping around and she could end up pregnant. We need to make a change in the law to account for this because she's never going to get married. She's never going to accept a king to rule over her. So we better be prepared. I think it's just not that far-fetched that she would get
pregnant. Daughter of Henry
pregnant.
VIII, give me a break.
and that she would get pregnant and have at least one child. There may have been several abortions that we don't even know about that she had to go through during her lifetime.
There's a book about Elizabeth, about her reign. The first sentence is, the Elizabethan reign and Queen Elizabeth was based on illusion, her reign. I mean, that's a credible statement.
The Virgin Queen? Come
Yeah,
on. If that's not an illusion, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So, I mean, a British colleague of ours, an Oxfordian, this man, I remember being over there in London and at the Globe, and we're talking, and I said, you guys are really wedded to the Virgin Queen. What is that? And he said, well, that's an icon too far.
Well, Hank, it's been a fascinating episode, and it's a fascinating book, and it really is line by line interpretation of each line of each of the sonnets, which is why it's such a hefty book.
I'd like to think it was easily read, though, or dipped into.
I definitely believe it is, especially if you're interested in the sonnets at all. I think that it's something that anybody who considers themselves a scholar of the sonnets has to read it and has to look at it, whether they accept it, believe it or not. They need to absorb what's in this book. Before we go, I do want to point out something that I think is very helpful, and that is you also have this one-man play that you wrote called Shake-Speare's Treason.
I wrote it with Ted Story.
I see that, and it's a nice little compendium to the monument,
Yes.
if I do say so. When you read this, it's sort of a guide to the best of what's in this book.
Yes.
And in reading it, as a director actor that I am, I started looking at it and going through it and imagining what it looked like live on stage. And you have references to images in here.
Yes.
And there's even a couple of little stage direction moments here about you rolling up your sleeves and rolling them back down again, I noticed. And I thought to myself, this is something that I think if you did just a slight variation on it so that it wasn't so personal to your voice,
Yes.
that other actors could use and perform. And I'd like to see that happen, because I would perform this piece if it wasn't so first person in your voice.
Yes, we did that for a reason at the time, but I could do that. That would be very interesting.
I think it could be, and I think you might end up with several other people out there in the world asking to license the performance rights to this.
Steve, you've come up with a great idea. Thank you.
Well, there you go. I for one would stage this if it wasn't so personal to you, and I don't think it takes that much revision to change that.
That's a lot of motivation you've just given me.
Well, there you go.
I'll be back to you in a week.
Oh wow! Well, you're much better at deadlines than I am, I tell you. I want to thank you once again for joining us here, Hank. It's been a fascinating conversation. And really, what we did today, I think, is something that we needed to do on this topic. And that is that we asked a bunch of questions. And as you know, that is the theme of this show, is to be out there asking questions. No question is too far-fetched. No question is too crazy when you're seeking the truth. And oftentimes, as we know, fact is much stranger than fiction. And I think what we discovered here is some details about some facts that definitely require further investigation on the parts of all. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. Don't forget, go support us by giving us a rate or a review on your favorite download location. If you want to know more, you can find out more at ShakesSpeareOxfordFellowship.org. That's ShakesSpeareOxfordFellowship.org, your source and resource for everything to do with the Shakespeare authorship question. I've been your host, Stephen Sable. Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.